like to start with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us this day. Thank you for giving us this wonderfully colorful man that we call brother, uncle, daddy, Grandy, good neighbor, and friend. Give us the courage and strength to endure for this hour. And most of all, thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. The flowers have barely wilted at my home because we were here just 2 weeks ago because Terry's mother passed away and we had the same celebration of life for her. So we have 2 individuals in the same home mourning, and it's been a hard time. I want to thank you for coming to honor my father. Perhaps you didn't even know my dad. Maybe you're here just to visit because you're a friend of ours, a co-worker. We hope each of you know us as friend, no matter which of the categories you fall under. And it's our privilege to know you as a friend. We're so grateful for your care and concern. We're going to do the best we can to bring my father the honor and dignity that he deserves today. At times this may be difficult. Please bear with us. I gathered much of this information from what I'm about to tell you from people that I've called during the week. Many of the people I hadn't talked to in quite a number of years, but my dad made such a great impression on people that they just didn't forget him, and they had some really awesome stories to tell about him. On the Harvard Hills website, you can go and see his obituary there. From here, it'll always be on the website. And if you can think of a memory that you have of him, we would be so honored to hear your thoughts on him and maybe something that you recollect later that you guys experienced together. Back in the 1930s, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected president. It was the era of the Great Depression, and it was the time of the Dust Bowl. Times were lean in America. My father was born in Kingston Springs, Tennessee in 1936. He was the youngest of 5 children: Henry, Bill, Jimmy, and Virginia. And like his brothers and sisters before him, he was born at home. They didn't have hospitals back then. As a matter of fact, they didn't have many of the modern conveniences that we take for granted today, such as telephones, television, even air conditioning or indoor plumbing. They would get their water from a pump outside and go to an outside latrine to do, well, you know what. And when I grew up, we were in a time where we had indoor plumbing. So I can recall when I was 5 or 6 years old, my grandmother at that time had moved to Nashville, but she still had relatives and friends in Kingston Springs. And so we took this journey, because back then, to a kid, that hour drive was like we had been for 4 or 5 days. And we went to visit Louise, my grandmother's best friend, and she still had a latrine. And that was the only bathroom that she had, the only way to use the bathroom. So it only took me about 2 trips out there to never drink water or anything the whole day, because I did not want to have to go use that bathroom. He was the son of a railroader. When my father was 10, his dad died of leukemia. So it goes without saying, there were tough times for he and his brothers and sisters, and especially his mother. My Uncle Jimmy's here and he can attest to the hard times that they experienced. But he came from really strong stock, because my grandmother was resilient. Not only did she raise her 5 children, she also raised a granddaughter along the way, whom you may have seen in the obituary. Her name was Charlotte. And that was okay with Daddy because now he had a baby sister. He was 4 years old at the time, and they became fast friends. She would become his closest friend and confidant for all of his life. They soon moved to Nashville, and when Daddy was a teenager, he was a lifeguard at the Cascades, which was a public pool. Sorry, excuse me just a moment. Cascades, a public pool that was located where the fairgrounds are in Nashville. Some of you may be old enough to remember that. I hear it told by several people that he was quite the good looker of that day. My Aunt Charlotte confirmed with me this week. I've been talking to her every week. She's in Las Vegas and she's not able to be here today. She was not able to travel the distance, although she still remains so close to my dad and she is heartbroken. But she confirmed with me that he was the best swan diver from the highest diving board at the pool. And the girls just swooned over him. And one of those girls at the pool was my mother. That's where they met. My father was a fitness instructor at the Cosmopolitan Health Studios in his younger days, where at one time he won the title of Mr. Cosmopolitan, which apparently was a big deal because many people have told me, you know, he was Mr. Cosmopolitan. And I guess that was kind of like the Mr. Nashville of the day. Daddy carried his interest in staying physically fit. Even onto his late 70s, he worked out. He had a gym that was close in his neighborhood, and he worked out every day. He did the treadmill 30 minutes a day, and he worked with weights. He was a bodybuilder, and he actually competed in a bodybuilding competition in his 70s. He didn't win it, and he was really super mad at the guy that did. He thought he was cheating because the guy actually owned the studio. But that's one of his funny stories, which we'll maybe talk about later. My daddy was a tough guy, like a tough guy, you know what I mean. He was strong as an ox, and he did not back down from any fight, nor did he back down to defend someone. I recall my mother loading my brother and I up in the car and going to the emergency room because she had gotten a call that my dad was at the emergency room, and we got there, and my dad had he had broken his wrist from a fight he had been in, and it was because he was defending someone else was being picked on that was his friend, and so he had to beat him up. My father served in the Air National Guard. You may see the flag that's over at the table as you come in. He had given that to my aunt after guard camp one year, and she had it all these years, and they brought it to me this morning to share with us so that you guys could see. He was proud of his country and his flag, which he prominently displayed in the center of his lawn in a large pole. The flag flew there. And it would be wise of you not to desecrate either one of them, because my daddy would probably bang your head in. He exercised his Second Amendment right. He taught us to honor our servicemen and women and to thank them for the service, for their sacrifice, for our freedom. All of their sacrifices have been great. And those that, I know there are some here that served in the service in some way. And I want to thank you and honor you tonight on behalf of my father. Thank you. He told me a funny story. Now, he's always telling funny stories. Everybody I've talked to that knows my dad and has ever met my dad, and you may have seen from the photographs that we have out, someone even had noticed that they'd never met him before, but they said, he must have been a card, and my dad was a card. He always had a funny story because he always wanted the end result, which was a laugh or a smile from someone. He was talking about at one time, he was one of the stories that he had for us was he was at Air Guard camp one summer in Biloxi, Mississippi. And apparently his guard mates, or whatever you call the airmen there, had a day off and they all went to the beach in Biloxi. And there was a pier there and they were all swimming around and they convinced Daddy to jump off the pier. They said, "Come on in, Grandy," which is what the name he went by. "The water's fine." And they were standing up neck deep. And when Daddy jumped off the pier, they all stood up and the water was only knee deep. So my daddy ended up with a broken ankle for that. But he probably had it coming because I guarantee you, he had already played some kind of prank on him. He was a storyteller. All of his stories were delivered in such a way for the end result, which is laughter, and he loved laughing. He had lifelong friends, one of which that is here tonight, Sonny Burnett. I saw his name in the book. I saw when he came in. I didn't know who the man was, so I went over and I saw the last name Burnett, and my dad spoke of him often, and thank you for coming and honoring him tonight. There's a picture of him probably from 50 or 40 back there, and he maintained friendship with him for all those years, and he had other friends that he had maintained friends with for that many years. My dad made friends very easily. And speaking of friends, his best friend is here, John, and his wife Julia, and we're so grateful to you, John and Julia, for the things that you've done for my father in the last 20 years that you were his best friend. He loved you very much, and we're grateful as a family to you, both of you. He referred to you affectionately as Chuck, although your name is John, and some sort of foreign name that was Euphon. So you can put the two together and maybe figure out what Daddy was saying. Daddy was born Arley Randall. We called him Randy, but later in life his name changed. You heard the song Grandpa. Well, my dad was not going to be called Grandpa because he was eternally young. So he put the G in front of the R, and he was known as Grandy from that day forward when my first child was born, Heather. And as I mentioned earlier, we knew my dad as a prankster. Not only did he tell funny stories, but he always had some sort of prank to pull. For example, we were at his home the other day, trying to get things in order, and there was a rubber snake on his dining room table. Lauren said, "What in the world is that there?" And I looked at her and replied, "Daddy would put that in the bed of his truck. And then he would ask someone to come over and look in the bed of his truck, and it would scare the crap out of the people that was looking." If this didn't have to be somebody he knew, it was probably people in the Kroger parking lot that he also did this to. So there were strangers that were able to learn about the prankster abilities that my dad had. She nonchalantly said, "Oh, okay," because she knew what kind of prankster my dad was. My dad didn't mince words. What came in the top of his head came out of his mouth, and sometimes it was not filtered, as you all know. He could make you squirm in a lot of different situations. Trust me, my heart fell to my feet many times. You never had to wonder where you stood with my dad. If he liked you, you knew it, and he would love you immensely. There weren't many people I knew that he didn't like. I can't think of any. He tried to make a friend to everyone. My dad was extremely smart. I think it runs in the family. He could work on anything. He actually enjoyed tearing things apart. I bought an ice maker, the little kind you put on the counter. The next thing I know, he's tearing it apart. And I was like, "Daddy, that thing worked fine." "Well, I just want to see how it worked. I think if you push this button here, that's what makes it stop, and then it starts building the ice again." I was like, "Okay, Daddy, that's good." But he would put it back together, and it would run better than it did before. My uncle was the same way. He had an ability to work with electronics, all the wiring and stuff. They just had a knack for the mechanics of things. My dad was a man's man. I was speaking with my cousin Mike on Tuesday, and he was very upset. He said, "You know, Kathy, your dad was the kind of man that every man wishes he could be. He traveled the world. He lived in England. He lived in Venezuela, living in fine hotels a year at a time. He worked for Aladdin, which is just the company that makes thermoses. And so they would send Daddy to all these countries when they were setting up new plants, and he would be the person that engineered all the setup for those machines so that people could have jobs in those countries. So when you're looking at a thermos, turn it over, and if you see that little hole, think of my dad, because that hole is where the plastic was injected from the machines that he worked on. Because hot molten plastic was shot through it in the mold. And hot plastic burns. And it burns bad. I recall one time, one of the machines had malfunctioned and the molten plastic spewed on my dad's hand and up his arm. It required emergency service, and he carried the scars from that injury to this day. I remember spending several days picking pieces of plastic out of those third-degree blisters. But my dad never flinched. He was so tough. I will tell you this, he was a badass individual. Excuse my language, but he was. You can ask anyone that knows him. He would go on to work for Aladdin for 37 years, and he retired from there in his 60s. Grandy loved his grandchildren. I don't know if you can even consider it love, really. It's more than love. He would sacrifice anything for them, and he loved his great-grandchildren as well. His grandchildren, Heather and Lauren, his great-grandchildren, Dalton, Shelby, and Piper, were the jewels in his crown. And Jeremy, I like to think he filled a void in my dad's life, where once stood a young man named Jody. He was a classy gentleman, and as you see in the pictures that are out and the pictures that were displayed up here, that he dressed to the nines. Charlotte said that she would have to iron a crease in his pants, and if it wasn't just right, he wouldn't wear them. And he wore every hair in place. Literally. Held there with cans of hairspray. And you better not touch his hair either, because if you did, you're going to get it. You would definitely not like his response. He told me once, "I always dress like a professional. That's half the battle, looking the part." So it's my dad's fault, postal service workers that are here, that I'm the only rural carrier in America that dresses like a city carrier in a uniform. Because he said, dress up when you go to work. That was sage advice, and I tell you this, it has served me well over the years. I never saw my daddy cry but 2 times. Because, you know, he's such a tough guy. I did see my father cry when my brother died in a car accident. He was only 16 years old, and he was the pride of my dad's life, the apple of his eye. I remember, to this day, I can close my eyes and still see, because we had arrived at the emergency room before my dad, because my dad was at work and they had to go get him. And when my dad came in and they told him the news, that 10-foot tall man fell to the ground like this. And that's exactly what it sounded like when he hit the floor. And I thought he died, because I was only 9 at the time. But he had only faded. But I believe a part of him did die on that floor that day. The next time I saw my dad die was when my grandmother passed away. And Aunt Charlotte told me when she visited with him a year ago, they stayed with him for a few weeks at his home, that he said, "Good night, Mama," every time that he laid his head down to go to sleep. He was proud, especially of his grandkids. He wouldn't tell you he was proud of you. I guess he didn't want for us to get boastful. I don't know. He never, in all my years, there was only one time he told me he was proud of me. But I can tell you this, he told everybody else he was proud. And sometimes I think that's a greater benefit. He was a hard worker. He set an example for his children. I don't recall a single day he called in sick to work for sickness or any other reason. My dad was a musician, and he loved playing bass and singing harmony with my Uncle Bill. He was a comedian. He loved to eat food, but he never cared for the bread of idleness. As you can see, many of you have had the chance to walk around. There's wooden cars all around. That after my father after my father retired from Aladdin, he started a new business right there in his carpentry shop. He began woodworking, and before long he became very talented at it. You can see these cars. That's not stain that you see in the different coloring and the different patterns. He used special wood that was hand selected, and he got so good at it that the lumber company started buying the cars because they were giving them as extravagant gifts to their best clients. He was gracious, generous, and his love language was giving gifts. If you needed something, you would not lack it. And it didn't have to be an extravagant gift. I don't even remember a time that my father came. He would visit us every other Sunday of late because it was harder for him to travel. He loved driving out to the country, which is out here, what he called it. And I don't remember hardly a time he didn't have a gift in his hand. I can tell you this, as a postal worker, I worked at the Franklin office, and oftentimes we were out on the street late in the evening because that is a really tough office. All the offices are tough. You should thank a mailman. You all have one. By the time they get to your house, they probably serve 600 other customers. So thank your mailman. Put a note in the box and just tell them thank you. They'll trip over themselves to serve you if you do that. But he would bring gifts, and if I have one of those headlights that stick on your head, I have probably 20. So if any of my postal worker friends need one, please see me after service and I'll make sure you get one. Maybe it was just a flashlight. Maybe it was a special tool that you needed, Jeremy. Maybe it was a jar of pickles. Just something that reminded you that he thought of you sometime during the time that he was away from you. You never lacked for anything. If he had it to give, you were sure to have it. My dad was so strong and courageous. Watching this man endure the pain and suffering of this last year is more than I can bear to remember. I don't want to remember. I have driven into the emergency room on probably 2 occasions. And the pain that man endured would make me weak in my knees. It made me want to faint. But this tough guy, he would be going downhill and all of a sudden, bang, he's back up and he's driving and everything's all hunky-dory. So I'm thinking this man is going to live forever. I'm so grateful that he's going to live forever because I'm not ready to let him go. The past year has been difficult. He was diagnosed with melanoma skin cancer. Probably from all the years that we've spent on the lake, we would spend all day. That was our life. My dad was such an adventurer. We had such a great childhood. We had the boat, he would make what they called back then an idiot board. And you get on the idiot board, and Daddy kicked the gas on the boat full blast, and it would pull you up out of the water, and we would ride all day on the lake. So that melanoma probably stems from those occasions that we spent so much time in the sun. But those were good times, and I'm not sure if they were worth it, but we sure have memories long lasting from that. So he had to have surgery to remove the melanoma that was on his arm. So they took a great portion of skin, and they took a skin graft from another section of his body. They put it on there, and he healed wonderfully from it. They wanted him to have chemotherapy, and he said, I'm not having chemotherapy. And I said, well, Daddy, they just want to make sure you're taken care of because you don't want that to come back. If it comes back, it's going to be bad. But that wasn't the issue. The problem was when they had the anesthesia on my dad, and this happens oftentimes in men, it did something to his urinary tract, and so therefore he was stuck with a catheter permanently since that day. So for a year, he walked around with a catheter. He was also an insulin-injecting diabetic, and he didn't like a diet because he loved food, so he ate what he wanted to. And he said he was going to eat whatever he did when he wanted to because he was a grown man. So the effects of the anesthesia reduced the man that was so great at one time. The classy man that dressed in classy clothes now had to wear jogging pants, which there's nothing wrong with jogging pants, but when you're in Walmart and your bag busts and it looks like you peed in your pants, it's quite humiliating for a man like my dad. In this last year, as I started to see my father's health declining, the big question was on the forefront of my mind. I struggled with asking my dad this question. So a couple of months ago, I mustered up the courage. And I said, Daddy, if you die, will you go to heaven? It was mostly for selfish reasons that I asked this question. Because all this time I thought he was going to live forever. And if he wasn't going to live forever here, I wanted to make sure that I was going to live forever with him in our next home. I was so heartbroken at his response when he said, no, he didn't think so. I asked, why, Daddy? I've heard so many people say that you sang in church and you sang so beautifully. He said, oh yeah, I got baptized. I said, so you do believe in Jesus? He said, yeah. He said, but honey, the things I've done in my life, I don't think I will be going to heaven. I said, Daddy, God doesn't operate like that. He's a gracious and kind and forgiving God. I left it at that because I didn't know what else to say to my dad. That's on him. You can't make someone's decision for them. You can't save anyone yourself. But I will tell you this, I'm encouraged today because when we went to my dad's house, there was a statue beside his bed with a picture of Jesus with his arms outstretched. And it was facing my dad where he had to get up every day and look at it. I know he had to see it. It was like he placed it there to see it as encouragement. So I sincerely believe that he had made peace with God, and I'm glad that I will be seeing my dad again. Now, he had so many stories to tell, so many silly stories, so many crazy stories. I talked to one of his best friends that had been friends with him for over 40 years the other day, trying to tell everybody about my dad. I didn't want them to find out, if I could reach them, to find out about it in the paper, because they had been such loyal friends to my dad. And they told the story about the time we were at the lake, and my dad they were all shored up, and we were having fun on the banks of the lake. And Daddy looked up and said, look there, there's somebody with a boat just like mine out in the middle of the lake. And they said, that is your boat. So he was telling the story of that. Daddy could embellish stories so well. There's also the story, if you can stomach it, that Heather has on her phone.
Oh, God.
She's going to hear you pretty much. Probably should not. It's not up here, right? But anyway, he tells the story of a bird that he had. So it's interesting. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. My family really appreciates your support.
Very much.